In the chaos of World War II, when death came from the sky and the sea swallowed men whole, one soldier's fight for survival became a story no one was meant to believe. First, his bomber fell from the clouds into the endless Pacific, leaving him adrift for weeks, starving, hunted by sharks. But when land finally appeared, he thought he'd found safety. Instead, he stepped into a prison more terrifying than war itself. What if I told you that sometimes, surviving the crash is just the beginning, that the real test of human endurance starts when you think you're finally safe? This is the story of Louis Zamperini, and trust me, you're not ready for what this man went through. Before we dive into this incredible true story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will change how you think about human resilience forever. Alright, let's set the scene. It's May 1943, and we're in the middle of World War II. The Pacific theater is absolutely brutal. Okay, American bombers are flying dangerous missions over Japanese-controlled territory, and the chances of making it home alive, well, let's just say they weren't great. Louis Zamperini was a bombardier on a B-24 Liberator called the Green Hornet. Now, this wasn't his regular plane, and that's important. The Green Hornet had a reputation. You know, it was old, beat up, and honestly, most of the crew thought it was cursed. But they needed every plane they could get in the air. On May 27th, Louis and his crew were sent on a search and rescue mission. Sounds routine, right? They were looking for a missing aircraft somewhere over the vast Pacific Ocean. But here's the thing about the Pacific during World War II. It was like flying over an endless graveyard. Planes went down out there and just disappeared. When the sky falls, so they're flying along, scanning the ocean for any signs of the missing crew, when suddenly, boom, the left engine starts failing. Now, losing one engine on a B-24, that's manageable. These planes were built tough. But then the second engine starts sputtering, and that's when things get real serious, real fast. The pilot, Russell Phillips, is fighting the controls. The plane is losing altitude, and they're still hundreds of miles from the nearest land. Louis later described hearing this awful grinding sound, like the plane was tearing itself apart from the inside. And then it happened. The Green Hornet just gave up. Picture this. You're 27,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, and your plane decides it's done flying. The crew has maybe 30 seconds to brace for impact before they slam into the water at over 200 miles per hour. When the Green Hornet hit the Pacific, it was like hitting concrete. The plane broke apart instantly. Out of 11 crew members, only 3 survived the crash. Louis Zamperini, Russell Phillips, and Mac McNamara. And they found themselves clinging to 2 tiny life rafts in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth. The ocean's endless hunger. Now here's where the story gets absolutely insane. These 3 men are floating on life rafts that are maybe 8 feet long. They have no food, no fresh water, and no radio. They're literally thousands of miles from civilization, and nobody knows where they are. The first few days, they still had hope. You know, they figured a search plane would spot them, or maybe they'd drift toward land. But the Pacific Ocean has other plans. Day after day, nothing but endless blue water in every direction. By day 5, they're already starving. The military rations in their emergency kit gone. They tried catching fish with their bare hands. They tried collecting rainwater in whatever containers they could find. But here's the thing about survival at sea. Nature doesn't care about your plans. And then there were the sharks. Oh man, the sharks. Louis described them circling the rafts constantly, sometimes bumping against the bottom. These weren't just curious fish. These were massive tiger sharks and blues, some of them over 10 feet long. At night, you could hear them splashing around the rafts, and all you could do was lie there and hope the thin rubber wouldn't tear. Hunted from above, just when you think it can't get worse, it does. After about 2 weeks adrift, they spot something on the horizon. At first, they're excited, thinking it's a rescue plane. Louis starts waving his arms, shouting for help. But as the plane gets closer, they realize it's not American, it's Japanese. The Zero fighter circles them once, twice, and then opens fire. Can you imagine? You're already half dead from starvation and dehydration, fighting off sharks every day, and now enemy aircraft are using you for target practice. The bullets tore holes in their raft. Mac was hit in the head, but survived. They patched the holes with whatever they could find, but now they're taking on water constantly. And this wasn't a one-time thing. Enemy planes spotted them multiple times over the next few weeks, each time treating them like moving targets. By this point, Mac McNamara was losing his mind. The constant fear, the hunger, The hopelessness. It was too much. He started having conversations with people who weren't there, talking about going home for dinner. Louis and Phillips watched their friends slowly slip away, and there was nothing they could do about it. The breaking point after 33 days, Mac died. Just gave up. His body couldn't take it anymore. And honestly, I don't know how Louis and Phillips kept going. They held a small service and let Mac's body slip into the ocean. Now it was just the two of them, barely alive, floating on damaged rafts in the middle of nowhere. Louis later said that by day 40, he was having full conversations with his family back home. He could see his mother cooking in the kitchen, could smell the food. His mind was playing tricks on him, but somehow, he held on to just enough sanity to keep fighting. They caught birds with their bare hands when they could. They collected rainwater during storms. Phillips developed infections that made his whole body swell up. Louis was down to maybe 80 pounds from his original 155. They looked like skeletons wrapped in sunburned skin. But here's what's crazy about Louis Zamperini. He refused to give up. Even when Phillips was unconscious for days at a time. Even when sharks were constantly circling. Even when Japanese planes were shooting at them. He kept believing they'd make it. Land on the horizon on day 47. After drifting over 2,000 miles across the Pacific, they saw it. Land an actual island with palm trees and beaches. Louis said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. After 47 days of hell on the ocean, they were finally going to be safe. They paddled their destroyed raft toward shore, dreaming of fresh water and food. Phillips was barely conscious, but Louis was telling him they'd made it. They'd actually survived. As they got closer to the beach, Louis could see people waiting for them. Salvation, at last. But wait. As they got closer, those people on the beach weren't waving and greeting. They were holding rifles. And they weren't American uniforms. Louis Zamperini and Russell Phillips had drifted right into Japanese-controlled territory. After surviving 47 days at sea, fighting off sharks and enemy aircraft, they were about to become prisoners of war. And honestly, what happened next made those 47 days in the ocean look like a vacation. From one hell to another, the Japanese soldiers who captured them weren't exactly following the Geneva Convention. If you know what I mean. Louis and Phillips were immediately beaten, interrogated, and thrown into a tiny cell with no windows. They'd gone from an 8-foot raft on the open ocean to a concrete box barely big enough to lie down in. But here's the thing. Louis thought this was temporary. He figured they'd be processed as POWs, maybe sent to a camp where they'd at least get regular food and medical care. He had no idea what the Japanese military was really like when it came to prisoners. They were taken to Ofuna, a secret interrogation center that officially didn't exist. This place was designed to break Allied prisoners psychologically, before sending them to regular POW camps. And the man running psychological warfare there, he took one look at Louis Zamperini, and decided this American was going to be his special project. The Bird's obsession entered Mutsuhiro Watanabe, known to prisoners as the Bird. This guy was something else, and not in a good way. He was a Japanese corporal who'd been passed over for officer training, and he took out all his anger and frustration on Allied prisoners. But with Louis, it became personal. See, the Bird had heard about Louis's background. Before the war, Louis had been an Olympic runner, competed in the 1936 Berlin Olympics where he'd actually met Hitler. The Bird became obsessed with breaking this famous American athlete, proving that Japanese superiority could crush even America's best. The daily beatings were just the beginning. The Bird would force Louis to hold heavy wooden beams above his head for hours. If Louis's arms dropped, guards would beat him with bamboo clubs. He'd make Louis clean latrines with his bare hands, then force him to eat without washing up. But the psychological torture was worse than the physical abuse. The Bird would be friendly one day, almost kind, giving Louis extra food or cigarettes. Then the next day, he'd beat Louis unconscious for no reason at all. It was designed to mess with his mind, to make him never know what was coming next. The unbreakable spirit. Now here's what's incredible about Louis Zamperini. After everything, the crash, 47 days at sea, months of torture and starvation, he never broke. Not completely. The Bird tried everything to get Louis to denounce America, to make propaganda broadcasts, to give up military secrets. Louis refused. Every single time, the other prisoners started calling him Lucky Louis. But it wasn't really luck, was it? It was something deeper. Louis later said he survived by holding on to memories of home, of his family, of running on the track at USC. He'd close his eyes during beatings and imagine he was back in California, training for another race. The Bird eventually transferred Louis to Naotsu, An even worse camp where prisoners were forced to work in coal mines and steel mills. The conditions were horrific. Men were dying of starvation and disease every day. But Louis kept fighting, kept helping other prisoners survive, kept believing that America would win the war. The weight of survival. By 1945, Louis weighed less than 100 pounds. He had dysentery, beriberi, and infections all over his body. The bird's torture had escalated to the point where other Japanese guards thought it was excessive. But Louis was still alive, still defiant, still refusing to break. And then, on August 15, 1945, everything changed. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was over. American forces were coming to liberate the POW camps. Louis had made it. But here's what nobody talks about. Surviving isn't the same as being saved. When Louis finally made it home to California, he was a different person. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the anger, it all came with him. He'd survived the crash, 47 days at sea, and 2.5 years of torture. But now he had to survive being free. The final victory. Louis struggled with what we now call PTSD for years after the war. He turned to alcohol, had trouble with relationships, couldn't hold down jobs. The bird haunted his dreams every night. For a while, it seemed like maybe the bird had won, after all. Just took a few extra years to break Louis completely. But in 1949, Louis found something that saved him again. Forgiveness. Not the kind of forgiveness people talk about in movies, but the real, hard kind that takes everything you have. He returned to Japan in 1998, not for revenge, but to meet with his former guards and offer them forgiveness face to face. The bird refused to meet with him, but Louis didn't care. He'd already won the most important victory of all, the one against hatred and bitterness. He carried the Olympic torch in the 1998 Nagano Olympics, running past the same camp where the bird had tortured him. Talk about coming full circle. What survival really means. So what makes Louis Zamperini's story so unbelievable? It's not just that he survived a plane crash, or 47 days at sea, or years of torture. Plenty of people have survived terrible things during wartime. What makes Louis special is what he did with that survival. He could have spent the rest of his life bitter and broken. He could have let the bird win by carrying that hatred forever. Instead, he chose something harder than survival. He chose to heal. He chose to forgive. He chose to turn his pain into something that could help other people. Louis spent his later years working with troubled youth, sharing his story, showing people that no matter how bad things get, you can choose how to respond. That your worst experiences don't have to define who you become. The measure of a life. Louis Zamperini died in 2014, at the age of 97. Surrounded by family who loved him. He'd lived to see his story become a best-selling book and a major Hollywood movie. But more importantly, he'd lived to see that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about staying human. The next time you think you can't handle whatever life is throwing at you, remember Louis. Remember that somewhere inside you is the same strength that carried him across 2,000 miles of ocean, through years of torture, and finally to forgiveness. It's there. You just have to choose to use it. His story teaches us that we're capable of surviving things we never imagined we could face. But more than that, it shows us that how we survive, who we choose to become after we survive, that's what really matters. If Louis's incredible story of survival and forgiveness moved you, hit that like button and share this video. Stories like this need to be told and remembered. Let me know in the comments. What do you think gave Louis the strength to not only survive, but to forgive? Don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable true stories like this one. These are the stories that remind us what humans are truly capable of when we refuse to give up. Thanks for watching, and remember, your worst day might just be the beginning of your greatest comeback. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next one.